The summer of 1944 pulsed with a brutal rhythm across Europe. It was a symphony of steel and fire. This was orchestrated by the relentless Allied advance. Yet, even as the beaches of Normandy bled, a new front was about to open. General Patton's tanks roared across France, but another equally vital front was fiercely contested. Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France, was born from a critical need. This was the liberation of the key French ports of Marseille and Toulon. These harbours held the potential for vast logistical support. They were envisioned as the lower pincer of a mighty Allied advance. This advance was designed to link with forces battling in the north. It would crush German resistance in a decisive embrace. It was an operation second only in scope to the Normandy landings themselves. This colossal undertaking involved 300,000 men. It included 1,000 ships and thousands of warplanes. A 10,000-man airborne contingent spearheaded the assault, but the genesis of Dragoon was steeped in bitter dispute. A strategic and political tug-of-war threatened to unravel the Allied command. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a man of profound conviction, vehemently opposed the plan. His geopolitical foresight fixed his gaze on the broader European chessboard. He yearned for a Balkans adventure in mid-1944. This would be a thrust into Central Europe ahead of the Soviets. Its purpose was to secure British post-war interests. Churchill saw Dragoon as a major blunder. He called it a Stalin plan that would inadvertently cede Eastern Europe to Soviet influence. Logistical constraints were a constant, maddening thorn in his side. The critical shortage of LSTs, indispensable landing ship tank vessels, had already prevented simultaneous execution with Overlord. This led to repeated postponements. Churchill, his frustration palpable, famously lamented, "The destinies of two great empires seem to be tied up in some goddamn things called LSTs." He even proposed diverting the precious Dragoon forces to Brittany. This would move them away from the Mediterranean. Across the Atlantic, US elf President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood firm. He was a rock against Churchill's pleas. Roosevelt viewed the Balkans adventure as potential American entanglement in British post-war interest. He prioritized instead a direct, decisive assault in France. Its goal was to kill the most Germans with the least loss of American soldiers. His stance found an unlikely ally in Joseph Stalin. The Soviet dictator was one of the invasion's strongest boosters. Stalin recognized its value in keeping Western allies focused squarely on France. This would leave Eastern Europe open for the Red Army's inexorable advance. The strategic debate raged, but it was Supreme Commander General of the Army Dwight D. Eisenhower who ultimately wielded the decisive power. Churchill, his voice heavy with the weight of empire, made a last-minute desperate appeal. He wanted to shift Dragoon forces to Brittany, but Eisenhower, his resolve unshakable, delivered a definitive no. As he later stated, the boss told the Prime no in every form in the English language. This solidified the invasion's execution for August 15th. This moment, a stark clash between two giants of the Allied cause, underscored the bitterly disputed nature of the operation. It was an operation that would reshape the war. While the Allies grappled with internal divisions, Adolf Hitler issued his own uncompromising decree. From the isolated confines of his Wolfschanz quarters, he commanded. The Riviera, that sun-drenched playground of peacetime, was to be transformed into an armed camp. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, roaring along the Côte d'Azur in his mud-splattered Horch in mid-May 1944, had been outraged. He found the fortifications minimal. Rommel loudly read the Riot Act to his predecessor. He ordered General Blaskowitz of Army Group G to go all out to strengthen the Sud Wall immediately. This directive sparked a frantic construction effort. 14,000 Todd workers toiled to build 578 casemated positions. Thousands of mines were soon along the beaches. Sturdy iron posts were placed underwater, wired with artillery shells. These were designed to rip open the bellies of tiny craft. Luxury hotels and villas were ingeniously converted into camouflaged blockhouses. General Friedrich Wieser, commander of the German 19th Army, received Hitler's direct, unyielding order. His force numbered 250,000 men. The order stated, "There will be no withdrawal." It continued, If anything happens along the Riviera, you will fight to the last man and the last bullet. WWII's 19th Army comprised Bodenstand or static divisions. These were filled with war-weary men from the Russian front. They often included unreliable non-German conscripts. This army was now condemned to a fight to the death. The Allied breakout from the Normandy stalemate on July 25th provided the final, undeniable strategic imperative. Pressure from the south was no longer merely advantageous. It was essential. Operation Dragoon, despite the lingering inter-Allied dispute, was now solidified. Its purpose was clear. It would break the German stranglehold. It would open a new imperative. It would accelerate the inevitable march towards Berlin. The die was cast. The final D-Day was set for August 15th. The Riviera, that famed stretch of sun-drenched coast, was to be the stage for a new act of war. Its transformation into a fortress began with familiar German fury. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, having roared along the Côte d'Azur in mid-May, had indeed issued his go-all-out order. This was to construct the Sud Wall, a rampart of concrete and steel. Yet, even as 14,000 Todd workers toiled to erect casemated positions and sow thousands of mines along the beaches, Hitler's primary obsession remained fixed on the Atlantic Wall. This strategic myopia was a blessing in disguise for the Allies. It initially granted a crucial window of freedom for Allied agents operating in the south. Intelligence networks blossomed before the Gestapo's iron fist clamped down. Despite frantic German efforts, the impending invasion of southern France became the war's worst-kept military secret. German intelligence observed troop movements and training. This, coupled with the relentless hum of barracks gossip, confirmed what many already suspected. This widespread knowledge, however, ironically contributed to German command's bewilderment rather than clarity. General Friedrich Wieser, commander of the German 19th Army, would later confess his frustration. He spoke of the deluge of previous intelligence estimates. He lamented that the only way to confirm Allied intentions would be when they hit the beaches. Amidst this brewing storm, the French underground proved invaluable. It was a spider web of espionage and sabotage groups, risking everything to provide crucial intelligence. Their reports on German dispositions and fortifications directly informed targeted Allied bombing raids. This saved countless lives, yet the resistance was far from a monolithic entity. It was fragmented, with powerful communist factions known as the FTP emerging. This bred deep suspicion within Allied ranks. American and British officers were particularly wary of post-war political struggles. The human cost of this shadow war was staggering. Agents like Helene Vagliano and Marie-Madeleine Fourcade endured horrific bestial treatment and torture. They personified the savage sacrifice demanded by intelligence networks. Their suffering was a stark reminder of the perils, even as vital information continued to flow. While German intelligence wrestled with a flood of contradictory information, Allied deception operations reached their zenith. The XX Committee's crowning glory, Operation Ironside, spun a web of disinformation. It masterfully convinced Hitler the primary Allied target was Bordeaux. Through a carefully managed spy, Bronx, a steady stream of seemingly authentic intelligence flowed to the Abwehr. This froze the crucial 11th Panzer Division in Bordeaux. This strategic misdirection kept vital German armoured reserves hundreds of miles away from the actual landing zones. It was a critical factor in Allied confidence. Adding to this advantage was the silent, relentless work of the ultra-decoding machine. It provided real-time intelligence on German plans and dispositions. General Patch, his soft-spoken demeanour belying the power he wielded, could read Wehrmacht messages. He read them simultaneously with their intended German recipients. This effectively removed the fog of war from his side of the battlefield. The immense psychological strain on Allied leadership in these final days was palpable. It reached a tragic crescendo with the suicide of USA Rear Admiral Don B. Moon. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Moon, a capable and well-liked officer, had begged for a postponement. His drawn, expressionless face was a stark testament to the crushing pressure. His death, just days before the operation, sent shockwaves through the command. It was a grim reminder of the personal toll of command. Despite such profound losses, Preparations for the invasion pressed forward with almost frantic energy. Brigadier General Robert T. Frederick, a man renowned for his legendary heroism, was appointed to command. Adored by his men as the head devil, he had a mere 35 days to lead the hastily assembled 1st Airborne Task Force, or FABTF. Units, some glider troops having never even seen a glider before, were welded together with unprecedented swiftness. Frederick, known for his belief in human reclamation projects, even brought Corporal Duffield Duff Matson Jr. directly from prison. Matson, a barrel-chested paratrooper with a violent past, became his bodyguard. Frederick transformed him into a respected fighting man. This was a force built on improvisation and fierce determination. Even the Nisei, Japanese Americans of the 442nd Infantry Regiment's anti-tank company, volunteered to fight. Their families were interned, yet they channeled their bitterness into fierce loyalty. They were told only weeks prior they would become glidermen. They adapted by substituting 6-pounder anti-tank guns for the larger 57mm guns that would not fit their Waco gliders. While Frederick wrestled with the challenges of his airborne force, the overall Allied command and control capabilities were a marvel of modern warfare. They were epitomized by the Catacton, a command ship bristling with radar and radio antennae. Aboard, top leaders like General Patch, Admiral Kent Hewitt, and General Lucian Truscott coordinated a vast invasion fleet. The final draft of the operational planning for Dragoon was circulated on August 1st. It was a testament to the meticulous planning that underpinned the entire operation. Even as the LSTs began slipping out of Naples, filled with battle-hardened veterans, a thinly veiled sense of doom was met with grim dog-face humor. Soldiers quipped, Hitler's probably learned the 3rd Division's coming and killed himself. Meanwhile, in his camouflaged Wolfson's headquarters, in East Prussia, non-attacked, Hitler made a fateful decision. After haranguing his generals until nearly dawn on August 13th, he refused to sign contingency orders for a total withdrawal from France. These had been presented hesitantly by General Alfred Jodly. Instead, Hitler chose to fight along the Côte d'Azur. He declared, "This is the one I will sign." This rigid adherence to a don't give up 1 foot of ground doctrine sealed the fate of his forces in the south. This occurred even as 2 German armies were encircled in Normandy. It condemned them to a hopeless struggle. The successful Allied deception, coupled with their superior intelligence and the relentless efforts of the resistance, had kept vital German armoured reserves away from the Dragoon landing zones. This, combined with Hitler's strategic rigidity and the negligible German air and naval support, set the stage for the invasion. Only 186 Luftwaffe planes and a mere handful of patrol craft and submarines were available. Despite its immense scale, the invasion would find its enemy strategically vulnerable and psychologically bewildered. The die was cast. The invasion was ready to begin. The pre-dawn hours of August 15th, 1944, crackled with a tension that was both strategic and deeply personal. Across the southern French coast, the air thrummed with deadly anticipation. It was ignited by the BBC's coded message, "Nancy has a stiff neck." This signal was received by André Bouchard and other resistance fighters. It confirmed the invasion was less than 24 hours away. This intelligence, relayed across a network of brave, often tortured, patriots, spurred German General Wieser to order a full alert. Yet it was an alert born of uncertainty. For the French commandos, steaming towards their homeland, the moment was charged with a raw, almost unbearable emotion. These men, many exiles for years, were finally returning to reclaim their soil. Their hearts pounded not just with fear, but with a fierce, burning desire for liberation. Their audacious raids on Ile du Levant, Port Cross, and Cap Negret were fraught with navigational errors. They suffered heavy casualties. They made the bitter discovery of dummy gun batteries. Yet, these raids were undeniably successful in sowing chaos. The fierce face-to-face brawls on Cap Negret were brutal. The relentless struggle against entrenched Germans in Napoleonic forts on Port Cross was costly. These bloody skirmishes served their purpose. They diverted critical enemy attention and resources away from the primary landing zones. Simultaneously, a ballet of deception unfolded in the skies and on the seas. British C-47, flying from Corsica, released metallic window to paint phantom fleets on German radar screens. 300 booby-trapped rubber dummies, dressed as American paratroopers, plummeted to earth north of Toulon. German grenadiers suffered painful surprises from these exploding effigies. They spread reports of an overwhelming airborne assault. This led Radio Berlin to denounce the rubber dummy hoax as a dastardly deed. Offshore, Commander W.C. Hughes, aboard the destroyer Summers, made a crucial, daring decision. Spotting unidentified German ships on his radar, he opened fire. His first salvo struck the Escabert in a massive, illuminating explosion. This action, while alerting German defences, prevented a potential catastrophe for the waiting Allied fleet. He sacrificed to safeguard the main force. As the first wave of Pathfinders prepared to jump, a thick, suffocating fogbank rolled in. It blanketed the coast and stretched far inland. This pallor of death, as Captain Siegel described it, turned the precise science of airborne insertion into a terrifying leap of faith. Pilots, unable to make out the drop zones, circled fruitlessly. This forced Pathfinders like Lieutenant DeLeo to jump into the absolute unknown. They were buffeted by angry hurricane blasts. Men plunged into the black sky, their minds racing. They knew they were scattered over hundreds of square miles of rugged, unfamiliar territory. Their mission to set up crucial beacons was severely compromised. This multi-pronged assault, with its commando raids, airborne feints, and naval engagements, achieved its intended effect on German high command. In the 19th Army Operations Room, maps began to glow with red spots. These indicated Allied forces at multiple disparate locations. General Wieser and his Chief of Staff, Walter Boch, were utterly bewildered. "Where do you think the Schwerpunkt, the main thrust, will be?" Boch asked, his voice strained. "I don't know, Boch," Wieser replied, defeated. "I simply don't know. We'll have to wait and see what develops." This overwhelming confusion, born of conflicting reports and simultaneous, seemingly random Allied actions, paralyzed German command. It prevented any effective coordinated response. The main airborne assault that followed was by any measure a chaotic, scattered affair. It brutally debunked any myth of perfectly executed, precise insertions. Paratroopers of the 551st Parachute Infantry Battalion made their harrowing first combat jump. Colonel Graves's 517th Parachute Regimental Combat Team plummeted far from their designated drop zones. General Bob Frederick observed the grim reality. He stated, "It looks like they're expecting us." Men landed violently. They smashed into stone walls. They snagged in towering trees. Some found themselves face to face with an alerted enemy. The widespread dispersion forced individual struggles for survival. It transformed the grand strategy into thousands of desperate, isolated battles. These took place in the inky blackness and murky forests. The glider landings that followed were equally catastrophic, flying at an unusually high 2,500 feet. Due to mountainous terrain, gliders encountered thick haze and battle smoke. This led to terrifying mid-air collisions. Heavy nylon ropes from errant gliders sheared away wings and fuselages. This sent men, jeeps, and equipment tumbling grotesquely to their deaths. The landing zones themselves were fields of destruction. Wacos crashed into ditches, trees, and the dreaded Rommelspargel defenses. At 90 miles per hour, they ripped into splinters. Pilots were forced into desperate improvisation. They crash-landed amidst the wreckage, surrounded by the dead and wounded. Despite the profound disorganization, the heavy casualties, and the fierce, unexpected resistance, these initial chaotic assaults achieved their critical objectives. They successfully diverted German attention. They sowed deep confusion within their command structure. Crucially, they established a vital foothold for the main amphibious landings that were to follow. The dawn of D-Day for Operation Dragoon was a messy, brutal, and often tragic testament to individual courage and collective improvisation. It secured a beachhead for the liberation of southern France. The sun, a relentless eye in the August sky, quickly burned away the lingering haze of battle. It cleared the pall of smoke that had choked the Côte d'Azur. With the beachheads firmly established, the initial thunderous assault gave way to a rapid, often chaotic inland thrust. American, British, and French forces surged forward. Their boots were now on French soil. They pushed through a landscape that in places resembled the cratered surface of the moon. Trees were splintered into toothpick size. The urgency to move inland was palpable. A command echoed in the words of Major Carful N. Red Morgan. He urged his men, "Get the hell on inland as fast as we can, and while we can." While the main amphibious landings had largely secured the vital coastal strip, the path inland was not without its shadows. The controversy surrounding Red Beach remained. Apex drone boats had failed to clear obstacles there. This forced Rear Admiral Spencer S. Lewis's unilateral rerouting of the assault to Green Beach. It remained a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of war and the friction within command. Beyond the tactical objectives, the brutal realities of the conflict continued to manifest in horrifying ways. The tragic discovery of Private First Class Henry Wickens, a Jewish refugee, was one such example. He was found mutilated and murdered by French partisans. It was a stark, chilling testament to the extreme violence that transcended mere battlefield objectives. This was a dark undercurrent to the liberation. Yet, the tide of liberation was swift and undeniable. Key coastal towns fell with remarkable speed. The bitter house-to-house fighting in St. Maxime ended. American Thunderbirds raised Old Glory over a captured signal tower. It was a potent symbol of defiance and victory. In Cavalaria, the extraordinary bravery of men like Staff Sergeant James P. Connor ensured the town's quick capture. Despite grievous wounds, he rallied his men with a fierce, "If there's only one of us left, we're going to get there and take it." The liberation of St. Raphael in particular brought deeply emotional reunions. Admiral Hewitt halted his convoy to allow terrified French civilians to surge forward, cheering. The stirring strains of the Marseillaise filled the battered streets. Deep inland, the scattered paratrooper units, despite their chaotic drops, displayed remarkable initiative and tenacity. They disrupted German defences and seized critical objectives. Captain Jess H. Walls found himself 12 miles off target near Saint-Tropez. He recognized German demolition efforts as a sign of withdrawal. Leading a hodgepodge force, he audaciously attacked and secured the stylish resort town. In Dragoon, Captain Battenfield, with audacious bluff and aggressive rhetoric, forced the surrender of a German-held hospital. He did this to just 2 unarmed Americans. This bold move, combined with the subsequent capture of the haughty monarchal General Ludwig Beringer and his staff, effectively decapitated German command in the region. Sergeant Donald M. Thompson's charging paratroopers achieved this. It plunged the enemy into a bewilderment of leaders. Lieutenant Colonel Wood Joag, after hours of chaotic house-to-house fighting, declared Draguignan secured. Its half-liberated streets were now firmly in Allied hands. The fight for Lemoy, a strategic gateway through which German troops would have to funnel, was equally decisive. Captain Bud Siegel and Lieutenant Kenneth Shaker set an iron trap ambush that devastated a German column. Later, the 550th Glider Infantry Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Edward Sachs, launched a determined daylight assault. They waded through knee-deep water and engaged in brutal house-to-house fighting to capture the town. This occurred after British hesitation, demonstrating potent American initiative. Further inland, Major Wild Bill Boyle, with his besieged little band of 50 men, faced nearly a battalion of Germans in Les Arcs. From his rickety kitchen chair command post, Boyle fought a tenacious defense. He prioritized the evacuation of his wounded. He ensured not a single wounded man is left behind. Colonel Rupert Graves ultimately plugged a cork into the bottleneck, securing the critical road center. Even the tenacious German defense of the old stone forts on Port Cross was finally broken. Their 12-foot thick walls had resisted initial naval shelling and air attacks. After 2 nights and 2 days of brutal fighting, Lieutenant Colonel John Ucker's desperate call for anything big out there was answered. The battleship Ramills responded. Her 15-inch guns, brought within a risky 6-mile range, unleashed enormously loud explosions. These finally shattered the German resolve. White flags waving frantically through the smog signaled surrender. Within a mere 48 hours of the initial airborne assault, the successful linking up of amphibious forces with paratroopers deep inland was achieved. This occurred in scores of locales. This swift consolidation was a testament to the individualistic efforts resourcefulness, and often improvised bravery of American paratroopers under immense pressure, it signified the broader success of Operation Dragoon. The securing of Draguignan, Les Arcs, and the vital coastal towns within days demonstrated the overwhelming effectiveness of combined arms operations. It showed the unwavering tenacity of the Allied forces, the Riviera roof figuratively caving in on German command. The path northward was now decisively open. It was preparing the stage for the relentless advance up the Rhone Valley. With the Riviera secured and the enemy reeling, the Allied advance transformed from a coastal assault into a relentless northward surge. General Sandy Patch's 6th Corps, now fully ashore and rapidly supplied, roared up the Rhone Valley. This vital artery promised to cleave German defences in two. The speed was astonishing. It was a testament to the disarray within German ranks and the strategic brilliance of exploiting the valley's natural corridor. The very landscape seemed to accelerate the Allied momentum. It was a stark contrast to the grinding stalemates elsewhere on the Western Front. This German disorganization was, in large part, a direct consequence of Adolf Hitler's increasingly erratic state. Less than a month after the July 20th assassination attempt, the Führer was a shadow of his former self. His mental and physical deterioration was palpable. Nearing midnight on August 15th, as Dragoon forces consolidated their gains in the south, Hitler held a strategy conference at his Wolfsassigns headquarters. The atmosphere was thick with tension. His demeanor was listless. A nervous twitch betrayed the internal turmoil. He had just received the full, grim reports of the invasion. "This has been the worst day of my life," he declared. His voice was devoid of its usual bombast. It was a chilling acceptance of strategic defeat that hinted at a mind retreating from reality. This crumbling resolve, however, did not translate into tactical flexibility. Instead, it hardened into rigid, unyielding no-withdrawal orders. It condemned his commanders to defend untenable positions. Field Marshal Johannes Blaskowitz, commander of Army Group G, grew increasingly frustrated. He repeatedly asked his chief of staff for word from Hitler's Wolfsganses to shift the 11th Panzer. He was met only with the stark, unbending 9, Herr Generals. German generals on the ground faced with the overwhelming Allied advance frequently found themselves unable or unwilling to follow directives that amounted to suicidal stands. Adding to the German plight, Allied air superiority became an insurmountable barrier. Even before the 11th Panzer Division could fully grasp the scale of the Dragoon landings, Allied aircraft had begun systematically destroying every bridge over the Rhone. This stretched between the Mediterranean and Avignon. The last span was blasted on the very morning of D-Day. This forced the low-slung panzers, exhausted from their desperate, ill-fated push, to run a gauntlet of Jabo attacks. Jabo meant fighter-bomber. Swarms of Allied fighter-bombers circled, then pounced. They strafed and bombed, loaded barges and vehicles on both banks. This aerial onslaught delayed the 11th Panzer Division's ability to reform and reinforce the Riviera for a critical 4 days. It highlighted the utter futility of their efforts. It left the southern front exposed. Meanwhile, the ports, those crucial logistical arteries, fell with astonishing speed. Toulon, a formidable challenge, was defended by 25,000 dug-in Germans. Its approaches were saturated by forts, bunkers, and minefields. It was expected to hold out for weeks. Admiral of the fleet Karl Dönitz had urged its garrison to fight to the death. Yet, by August 27th, Admiral Rufus, commander of Toulon's garrison, decided he would not die for the Führer in a hopeless cause. He surrendered the citadel with 1,800 sailors. Marseille, defended by huge casemated guns, including the monstrous 340mm Big Willie, fell shortly after. Caen was evacuated on August 24th. Grasse was evacuated on August 25th. Within 2 weeks of the landings, these main objectives were seized far ahead of projections. They provided the Allies with desperately needed logistical hubs. By September 3rd, unloading began at Marseille. On September 4th, it began at Toulon. This transformed the strategic landscape of the war. The rapid advance up the Rhone Valley culminated in a historic moment near Dijon on September 12th. There, the forces of Operation Dragoon spearheaded by General de Latre's French 1st and 3rd Algerian Infantry Divisions, linked up with General Jacques Leclerc's French 2nd Armoured Division. This division had been fighting its way south from the Normandy front. This monumental junction, 475 miles north of the Riviera landing beaches, effectively merged the two invasion fronts. Crucially, it trapped German Army Group G in southwestern France. The pincer movement was complete. Its jaws were closing inexorably. The Rhone Valley advance became a decisive factor in the final defeat of German forces in Europe. Within a month, General Friedrich Wiese's 19th Army was virtually destroyed. Over 100,000 German prisoners were taken. The drain on German resources and manpower from other fronts was immense and irreversible. As General Dwight Eisenhower himself declared, there was no development of that period which added more decisively to our advantages, or aided us more in accomplishing the final and complete defeat of German forces than did this attack coming up the Rhone Valley. Operation Dragoon, once a bitterly contested strategic choice, had proven its worth. It liberated the southern two-thirds of France. It accelerated the inexorable march towards Berlin. The dust of battle eventually settled over the sun-drenched fields of Provence. But the echoes of Operation Dragoon would reverberate through history. It shaped not only the immediate outcome of World War II, but also fueled a persistent, passionate debate about its strategic necessity. Yet, for the millions liberated and the thousands of German soldiers captured, the outcome was undeniable. It was a decisive Allied victory. Dragoon's operational achievements were staggering. It swiftly liberated the southern two-thirds of France. This was a vast territory now freed from the suffocating grip of Nazi occupation. The Rhone Valley advance had virtually annihilated General Wiese's 19th Army. It netted over 100,000 German prisoners. This was a catastrophic loss of manpower that could never be replaced. Crucially, the captured ports of Marseille and Toulon, once formidable German strongholds, were transformed into vital logistical arteries. By the war's end, these harbours would funnel an astonishing 4.1 million tons of cargo. They would also move nearly 1 million Allied troops into the European theatre. This logistical feat underscored Dragoon's immense contribution to sustaining the Allied push towards the Rhine. It was an operation of immense scale. It was a whirlwind of combined arms that decisively reshaped the European conflict. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander, remained steadfast in his conviction. There was no development of that period, he declared, which added more decisively to our advantages or aided us more in accomplishing the final and complete defeat of German forces than did this attack coming up the Rhone Valley. For Eisenhower, Dragoon was not merely advantageous. It was vital to Germany's final defeat. It was a strategic imperative that could not be ignored. However, Winston Churchill, the ever-prescient British Prime Minister, carried his dissent to his grave. He continued to view Dragoon as a monumental blunder. He saw it as a tragic diversion of resources that had squandered an opportunity for the Allies to push into the Balkans. In Churchill's geopolitical calculus, this missed thrust had inadvertently allowed the Soviet Union to consolidate its power in Eastern Europe. He implied a direct link between Dragoon and the eventual descent of the Iron Curtain across the continent. His was a bitter lament for a post-war Europe he believed could have been different. While some historians have echoed Churchill's concerns, even labeling Dragoon a Stalin plan designed to keep Western allies out of the Soviet sphere, the narrative of its independent strategic merits for the Western allies remains robust. The opening of a new major front forced Germany to divert critical resources from other theatres. It accelerated the liberation of France. It relieved pressure on the stalemated Normandy front. It was a Western Allied strategy, conceived and executed for Western Allied objectives. It demonstrably contributed to the final defeat of Nazi Germany. Beyond the strategic maps and political debates, Operation Dragoon was, at its heart, a testament to immense human cost and sacrifice. It was etched in the faces of the WWII, those fierce mountain fighters from the Atlas Mountains. It was in the quiet resolve of the Nisei soldiers, Japanese Americans, whose families were interned, yet who fought with fierce loyalty. It was the unyielding spirit of French commandos, returning to their homeland after years in exile. It was the quiet heroism of resistance fighters like Helene Vagliano, who endured unspeakable torture rather than betray her network. Their collective bravery, ingenuity, and often improvised actions against overwhelming odds formed the bedrock of Dragoon's success. From the chaotic, scattered, airborne drops to the brutal house-to-house fighting, countless individual acts of courage, resourcefulness, and sacrifice painted the human canvas of this war. The historical debate surrounding Dragoon's strategic necessity endures. It is a complex intertwining of military logistics, political foresight, and the long shadow of the Cold War. Yet, its operational success and critical contribution to the overall Allied victory are undeniable. Operation Dragoon, once a hotly contested plan, ultimately achieved its ambitious goals. It liberated a nation. It crippled a German army. It delivered a decisive blow that propelled the Allies closer to the final defeat of Nazi Germany. It stands as a powerful, if sometimes overlooked, chapter in the epic story of World War II.